Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's Expert Roundtable. The theme of this event, as you may already know, is energy providers and their technology teams are missing the mark on digitalization. This is the problem statement that I'm putting forth, and I've had the great fortune to be joined by a handful of expert speakers on this very topic to provide arguments in agreement or maybe disputing this claim. Today's session is a joint venture being put on by Saviant Consulting and Schechter Energy and Policy. Saviant works with machine manufacturers and industrial engineering businesses for their data platform engineering, advanced analytics, and intelligent software implementations. It leverages leading cloud and data platforms like Azure and AWS to implement custom solutions for use cases across industrial IoT, machine learning, industrial AI, and cloud native apps. Meanwhile, Schechter Energy and Policy, which I run, provides expert insights into the rapidly developing worlds of clean energy, power utilities, and sustainable business practices. My name is Matt Chester, and I'll be the moderator of today's session. But again, our panelists today are the real rock stars that I know you've all joined to listen into. So let me give a brief intro into our topic, and then I'll bring forth each of our panelists so you can get to know them before we dive into the topic. So again, the problem statement that I put out there is that in this new era of digitalization and big data, we're seeing countless companies and sectors take true advantage. There's a reason we talk about companies wanting to be the Netflix of this area or the Amazon of that other one. Other main names that come up to take best advantage of these new opportunities are, tech companies like Google, Microsoft, Apple, Uber, etc. But what we never really hear is people pointing out to a utility company as the standard bearer when it comes to an economy-wide leader in new technology, particularly when we're talking about digital and data. But again, I think that represents a true missed opportunity, as utilities have so many unique advantages that other companies could only dream of. Built-in and guaranteed customer bases who are buying a day-to-day essential product, thousands or millions of customers feeding to the company a near constant stream of data, and more. So with those opportunities at their fingertips, the fact that energy companies and by extension their data partners haven't established themselves as true data leaders is, at least on some level, a failure. And that's, again, my thesis, but it's time to bring in today's panelists to tell me why I'm crazy to make that claim, or perhaps they'll agree with my assessment, or reasonably does the answer fall somewhere in between. And before I bring these experts in live with me, I do want to give an early nudge to our live attendees that we intend for this to be a highly interactive session. We're not going to wait until the end for Q&A, but rather I want to hear from you all throughout the session. So as you hear one of our experts say something that you find noteworthy, don't wait and use the comment features to share your questions, and we'll insert them directly into the conversation in real time. So this is a prime opportunity to interact with these leaders directly. So I urge you to take advantage of it. And with that, let me introduce our guests. So first we have Andy Schechter, an executive manager who serves on the leadership team at Siemens Advanta. He leads the digital utilities practice at the company and has extensive utilities software industry experience. He's held leadership positions with several utility software solution providers, and currently he works with utilities and retail suppliers of all sizes across North America. More than 20 years of software sales, marketing, and operational executive experience, Andy helps electric, gas, and water utilities with digital transformation, grid modernization, and energy resilience. So thank you for joining us today, Andy.
It's a pleasure to be here, Matt. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to this lively conversation.
Wonderful. And next, we're welcomed by Eric Anderson, a director at West Monroe, a digital services firm focused on helping utility clients adapt to quickly evolving industry conditions. His core area of focus is on modernizing the electric distribution system through implementing new operational technology that leverages data, telecommunications, and smart devices to digitize operations and adapt to a changing grid. Eric's previously held positions at PG&E, managing real-time grid-facing application teams for its distribution control centers and various industry product and software vendors. Welcome also to today's session, Eric.
Thanks, Matt. Looking forward to it.
Great. I'm happy to also welcome my friend Shayan Chanda. Shayan is a senior scientist at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado. He is also the founder of PlexFlow, a startup that helps utilities undertake advanced analytics for a fraction of the typical cost. Prior to joining NREL and PlexFlow, he was a senior data scientist at National Grid and an electric engineer at Idaho National Laboratory. So again, thank you and welcome to the panel, Shine.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. And last but certainly not least, we have Jignesh Shah, Vice President of Client Services at Saviant Consulting. Jignesh drives the global technical programs at Saviant. He transforms businesses' unique problems into technical solutions by consulting them on various technologies. His expertise lies with data analytics, AI, IoT, and machine learning. And in his 12-year IT stint, it consists of multiple coveted positions in sought-after organizations such as Capgemini and PTC. He designed and developed complex architectural solutions, and we're grateful for him being here as well. So thank you for joining us, Jignesh.
Thank you for inviting me, Matt. Exciting.
Yes, and another face and name that you'll see on the screen today is Carol Mitchell-Lynn. Carol is the co-founder of the Industry 4.0 Club, and she's helping to produce today's session. So she's going to make sure all of our tech runs smoothly, and critically, she'll also help bring forth some of those Q&A from the audience as you guys have questions. So again, please bring them in. Please be active in the comments, and we'll be eager to get your questions answered. So thank you for helping us today, Carol.
Thank you, Matt, for having me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful. So am I. So now that we've got that all situated, let me go back once again to my introduction and thesis, because I'd like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to react to that statement that I outlined. And once again, that's very, put it simply, energy providers and their technology teams, they are missing the mark on digitalization. So I want to go down the line and pose this question and get the reaction of this problem statement from each of our panelists. Am I being too hard on the utilities, or are you agreeing with me? What are the challenges utilities are facing in this regard? So let's consider this our opening statement. So Andy, I want to start with your reaction.
Well, I definitely like the thesis statement and think that there is something to it. The question that the statement really brings up in my mind is, is it a matter of energy companies actually resisting, or is it a matter of some other factors that are coming into play? And I would argue that the answer is it's probably some other factors more than resistance. So that is where we as a community can come into play to support the transformation efforts that are absolutely required for energy companies to continue along and reform business models and really serve as the key players that they are in our society. So that's where that's sort of my opening statement to that thought. And there's a lot to unpack there for sure, and look forward to doing that.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that. Eric, let's turn to you next to see what your initial thoughts are.
Yeah, absolutely. As I've thought through this, working in the industry for like over a decade, I would say the utilities, comparing them to the Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, is a little bit unfair. They're playing under different rules, right? They're regulated. The regulators dictate where they spend their money. So they have to be really strategic in planning where they want to invest and the value they're getting from it. And they're held to those things by regulators. So the ability to innovate is very difficult in that environment. That being said, I would say over the past couple of years, utilities have really ramped up their digitization and focus on data. They're making massive investments in GIS and ADMS and all the different acronyms, right? We have smart meters automatically providing data, automation on the grid. When I think about how they're deploying these massive capital programs, there's one gap where I would say they are missing the mark, and that's on people. Even the Amazons and Facebooks have people that are critical to running that digital operation. Being a capital intensive environment, utilities struggle to invest in the change management and training and upskilling required to really adopt those technologies. So I'll focus on some of those areas when we talk today. But I would say that when we want to make that transition, I think focus on people is where we can really up the game in the industry. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well said, Eric. Sean, you're up next.
My perspective on this is, and I totally second Eric when he mentions that utilities operate in a totally different environment and it's not fair to compare them with the Googles of the world. But at the same time, as the grid is evolving, and if consumers are slowly transitioning into becoming prosumers and taking more responsibility of their energy security, then the system should be designed in a way to enable the utilities to think from individual customer perspective, which customers need to be targeted, and at the same time giving both the utility and the customer the tools, the digital tools, the data driven tools that they would need to bridge the gap in terms of how technology can come together in creating the future grid. So I'd like to shed light on that topic, basically, how, with all these different data streams that is coming in, how can the utility analysts as well as the customers who are the end users of the product can work together, making the most of these digitally available tools to transform the grid together, and not one party leading the effort and the other following them in suit. So yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for that. And then lastly, let's go to Jignesh. What do you have to add that to what your fellow panelists have already stated?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and yes, kind of agree with most of what everyone has said. There are a lot of factors playing and pushing towards these changes. Yes, power companies, energy and utility organizations have faced a lot of challenges in the past couple of years, be it data security, digitalization, cyber attacks, and a lot of social and governmental pressure are also there to revamp and to come to the terms with new way of working. And on the other side, a lot of technological cost is coming down. There is a lot of pressure from consumers to provide a lot of information, now real time as well, and that is definitely sparking a change across energy and utilities domain. And I'm sure when during our discussion we'll discover what are some of the things they can do to increase the adoption and the rate at which they are digitalizing or data driven decision making.
Great, thanks for that, and thanks to all the panelists. I can see that we're already in for some dynamic discussion today. So let's move into kind of a breakout focus to some more specifics as opposed to the broader latitudes. And as I do this, I want to once again notice to our attendees that we encourage active Q&A from you. So please don't hesitate to type in and share your questions along the way, and we'll pull them into the discussion. But the first area I want to dive more deeply into is technology. And so the question I want to throw out there to the panelists, and anybody can feel free to jump in first on this, but what are some of the specific exciting technologies that are out there for utilities to take advantage of when we're talking about digital and data, and are they properly taking advantage of them now, or are there any holdups? So, I'll throw that out there for anybody to jump in first.
I can take one. So I had 2 points here. The first, I think JD Power put out a report last year that says 1 in 3 utility companies doesn't have an app to interact with the utility. I would say that is a table stake technology that needs to be gone after. I think the new generation of folks want to pay their bill on an app, right? And above and beyond that, there's a bunch more you can do around bringing customer programs, energy efficiency, everything to your custom tailored experience for a customer. But one other area that I did want to highlight that's a little bit more leading edge is around machine learning AI. I think we've done some good research around using drones to inspect assets. What we found is the drone's a fun tool, right? You don't need a drone. You just need to capture picture data and image data and associate metadata with it. A picture's worth 1,000 words. You can detect defects, understand grid components, all that information that someone who's been doing this for 40 years and now is retiring and handing the job to someone who's been doing it for 5, right? All that knowledge is being lost. So if we're able to get folks training these types of algorithms, I think it's a really good opportunity for knowledge transfer back to the people point.
Eric, I thought to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, around tools and applications that utilities have for the consumer or the prosumer. I would also say that from an employee perspective and an employee engagement opportunity, that's a huge area of growth that utilities really have to move forward on. The generation of workers coming in to replace that person who's been out there for 40 years is looking for these types of tools and applications, is certainly looking for applications with, machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities, things like that. The other thing too is, frankly, capturing the data that's inside those 40-year workers' heads before they leave, and trying to, use that data as a way to help the next generation do the job, I think is critically important. So it's, I think it really hits across all phases, which is both from the customer perspective and also from the actual employee perspective. I also think that would help significantly in terms of recruiting the next generation of engineers who want to stay at utilities and really help transition that business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And Jinesh, I want to pull you in because I know a lot of the work that you do is in helping the energy companies to kind of overcome their technological hurdles. So I'm wondering if you can speak to any of the specific technological barriers that do make it hard for energy companies specifically. Do they have any sort of technology-based handcuffs, and what are the keys to unlocking those?
So when I was reading our topic for today, energy providers and their technology teams are missing out on data and digitalization. The first point which I could think and came to my mind was whom we are working with. So the leadership team of these energy organizations, some of these customers we work with, why they are successful, or on the contrary, if they are not successful, or if they are missing the mark. Idea is to find the right stakeholders. Idea is to find right leaders who are not just sponsoring some of these programs, but they have a stake in it. They truly believe that their vision and mission for next couple of years, 3 years, right? It is to change not just bits and pieces, but sometimes overall workflows, sometimes overall reimagining the way they have been working historically. And because of the nature of energy utilities domain, there is a lot of regulations. It's a slow moving, sometimes it's a slow moving changes. So we would like to work with leaders who truly believes in some of these programs, and they are not just throwing money. They believe in the vision. They believe that things need to change, and obviously there are multiple levels of change. Business value. I think Eric mentioned about people behavioral change and cultural change as well. Going towards the maturity curve on all of these fronts, I think that's what we look for. And that is my point. Before even going to technology, I think finding the right people to work, right partners to work is pretty important.
That makes total sense. Couldn't agree more with that statement. That leadership is so vital, and not change for change's sake, but change with purpose is critically important. And the adage of hey, their utilities are risk averse. Their job is to literally keep the lights on, keep gas from exploding, things of that, things of life and death types of things. And yet there's a whole new world here in terms of each of us as consumers are probably way more engaged potentially with what the product is that's being supplied to us because of the connected home, the electric vehicle, all of these different types of technologies that are really driving scale at this point. Change is not just something that we can choose to be involved with or not. So the leadership is vitally important. I thought that was a great point.
No, I definitely agree. And Shine, I actually want to bring you in on this because I feel like you have a unique perspective as working both in the startup world as well as the national labs, and kind of the different perspectives of, maybe trying to reach people who are, I don't want to say skeptics, but are less motivated for these new technological solutions. So what do you find is kind of the best strategy to reach those people, and if you have to convince them that these new technologies and opportunities are important for the future?
Great question, and I was thoroughly engaged by the other comments that was floating around. So, fortunately, through my position, I have a foot on innovation. Like at one point in my day job, what I'm innovating for the federal agency is these next generation technologies that is being built out at the national labs. While the startup company that I'd started a couple of years ago, it was mostly focused on how we can make better use of data that is already existing within the utilities, and at the same time capture the data from the edge, which means that from the customer edge, and try to bring it together so the utilities can make meaningful information out of it. And my whole perspective in that is that, and thankfully you mentioned like Google and Amazon a few times at the start of the conversation. It's that if the consumer is to be engaged, the innovation has to be personalized, right? So if I am if the utility wants to cap or do some sort of like a proactive program about how they're going to manage electric vehicle loads in a certain feeder, then they should be proactive in such a way that they do their advertising or marketing campaigns to just the right or targeted set of people, and they get just the right amount of people showing up at the door. Now, at the same time, the national laboratory side, we are investing in a lot of, like taxpayers' dollars literally in designing those algorithms where if, like 50 cars start charging at the same time, we don't go back to the 70s when everyone was cranking up their air conditioners at the same time and causing brownouts, right? So we are investing in those kind of algorithms, and national laboratories are the perfect place where these kind of algorithms are being publicly funded and de-risked. So utilities at this point, they have lots of sandboxes that they can play in. First of all, they have the national laboratories, then they have the other different companies that they can work with as, like proof of concepts or whatnot, to just kind of understand what can be done in terms of the digitalization space. So to keep it short, basically, I'd like to note that the opportunity is out there, the data is out there. Different companies can bring the data to the utilities forefront, right, through like live streaming onto their Azure clouds. And then there are enabling partners. So the ecosystem is there. Now, all that remains to fill in the gaps is literally the mindset or the leadership change, which will encourage the next generation of workers to start using these different data points, right? And once that is done, I believe we are totally ready for a smart grid, smart city future.
I totally, you sparked something in me that really we haven't talked about yet, and maybe we will, is not only leadership at the actual utility level and within utility departments, but also leadership at the public utility commissions and other government regulatory bodies, thinking about things like cloud adoption. And we know that utilities have been slower to adopt cloud than other industries. And why is that? There's a number of factors, of course, but certainly one of them would be from a regulator perspective. What are the accounting rules in terms of being able to capitalize that type of expenditure versus using it as an operational expenditure? Those types of things come through my mind too. So it's really a connected set of leadership step forward that needs to occur. And it's happening in pockets for sure. But to have it ubiquitous across our industry for what is needed with the transformation that is happening. And I know we use digital transformation and grid modernization and AI ML as like buzzwords, but they're way more than buzzwords. So really good points, I thought. And that sparked sort of the other side of the leadership coin of where we are, and thinking regulators play a really important role here.
Absolutely. And in terms of the regulators, that actually ties into a question that we just got from the audience that I'd love to bring in from Dick Brooks, who asked, what influence will the national cybersecurity strategy have on the energy transition? Specifically, what changes and regulations should a utility anticipate over the next 18 months? I'm curious if any of you have any insights or perspective on that specific strategy or general cybersecurity needs in the context of everything we're talking about here. Maybe it's a little too into the cyber topic for what we're talking about today.
I can just add a couple comments, right? I think just cyber is huge, right now for utilities. Resiliency is top of mind, not just from weather, but from cyber attacks and any attack vector. And I think even before the national cybersecurity strategy was set forth, utilities were already starting to look at their supply chain, right? If I'm buying a relay that goes on the grid, where does that chipset come from? Where's my vendor buy the chipset behind there, right? And there's a lot of interest in tracking, down to the component level of the things being put on the grid to make sure it's coming from safe places and finding ways to have alternatives. And I think that's going to continue. I think, ability to isolate is another common trend that we're seeing, is utilities wanting to cut off their operational systems from any other network and be able to continue to keep the power on if someone else gets onto the system. There's a lot of investment that will continue to occur. And I think, across the board, from supply chain to operations to just day-to-day, cybersecurity practices within utilities.
I have a comment on that, is that, the cybersecurity is, I think it was announced earlier this month, right? If the strategy, national cybersecurity strategy, but as you're mentioning, it has been like some parts of it were already there, in the sense that there was this Buy in America Act, or so that we are kind of minimizing the risk landscape for utilities. Always been there. There's always a requirement for different compliances. And there are always different government agencies like CSER or even DOEs, different arms that invest in cybersecurity, cyber resilience projects. Then the NIST and different other organizations produce the CVSE, which is the Common Vulnerability Indices, every month or every couple of weeks, which lets people know that, okay, there's a log4j attack and you have to reboot all your systems. So now this question, I find it very important, is because it kind of reinforces that why digitalization is necessary. On one hand, it might appear that it is kind of broadening our risk landscape by exposing our data to multiple clouds across nations. We don't know where our data is being, backed up. Google is saying everything is backed up in the US, but for the sake of redundancy, the data might be somewhere under the ocean, right? But then at the same time, this digitalization, while it is kind of increasing the risk, but it also helps us map the different risks and who are we exposing to the risks. And if a risk ever gets exploited, it will really enable us to cut short the time to contain the risk. So basically, we can manage the risks quicker if utilities go on to bridge the digital gap that exists between today's operations and how consumers actually access the electricity. So the regulators should be aware of this kind of conversations that we are having in terms of the necessity to bring in data from different places, connecting them, putting to an AI ML algorithm, and then creating a kind of an operational interface. They should be aware of these policies and encourage the utilities to somehow make it part of their rate base or something. I'm probably throwing out terms out there, but somehow these kind of decision-making hurdles that utility leadership has to go through. Okay, I cannot use this software because it cannot be part of my rate base, so I'll just go along how it. So though that thing has to change, and I believe this national cybersecurity strategy can be a big deal, especially with more DRs will get connected with FERC 2222, more virtual power plants, more people using apps like Eric was mentioning, table stakes technology, more digital. It's going to influence a lot of regulations. I just don't know how, but it will. It should.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And yeah, again, thanks for your question, Dick. And before we move on from the technology focus, we had one other question come on that is doing exactly what I was going to do with my next question, which was bring it into, again, specifics and specific examples. So Paul Finney has asked, with smart meters in many homes, could a time come when rather than a blanket cost of energy per unit, could a price per unit per minute or second be used across the day? This might drive the use of cheaper energy out of peak time. So he's talking about some sort of a time of use or demand response opportunity there. And I know a bunch of you work at least in some respect in that area. So I'd love to throw that one out to the group as well.
I think that's a great question. But by the way, the cybersecurity one was as well. Thinking about how we are adapting and changing in our personal lives with connected homes and behind the meter types of activities, and potentially photovoltaics on our roofs, and neighborhood banks of EVs powering and becoming a mini grid, and things of that nature. There's a lot to that in terms of real time of use, and that comes down to accessibility and being able to process data in a real time or near real time nature, and being able to have interoperability in data. So that's my general statement around that question, and there's certainly more to unpack there.
Andy, I'd like to take that a step further. You mentioned that AI and ML were used as buzzwords, and I'm wondering if this is a perfect use case for AI and ML because of the large amount of data available.
I mean, my simple answer on that, Carol, is yes. But there's a lot more devil in the detail type of activity that needs to occur to make that happen. But yes, it certainly is. There's a lot of in the laboratory perspective of how we can harness AI and machine learning algorithms to be able to predict what's going to happen based on the data that's received in the past, et cetera. But it's the reason I referred to them as buzzwords is not that they are buzzwords; they're real. But if we're not deploying them, they remain as buzzwords. And so I think that's really where I was coming from on that. But yes, for sure, this would be a way to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning with the vast amount of data that's being collected and able to be used to serve up time of use among many other types of services that could be provided.
And
just a point.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Just a point. A lot of large utilities and energy trading and accounting firms have started providing a lot of comparative data in terms of peak load as well as cost, cheapest cost which is available. And at this point of time, it's at a very high commercial use, not at a residential use. But a lot of energy accounting and consulting firms have started doing that for their large commercial customers. And I'm sure there will be a day in future where it comes to our homes as well, where we can get some benefit rather than paying flat rates. We can leverage some of those fluctuations in load, fluctuations in prices.
I would say also it's interesting to think about in terms of fluctuation of load and so I'm going to ask a question as opposed to give an answer, and maybe it's a little bit rhetorical, maybe not, but what is the consumer? What am I as the consumer willing to give up in terms of control to take advantage of time of use types of capabilities where I feel that my usage is being analyzed, and it's like, hey, you could charge your vehicle at this time and you'll get this rate. There's an element of giving up control there that I would like to think people are wanting to do.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for all of this. This is great, and we continue to have some good questions coming in from the audience. So I want to pull one more in because I know it's a technology that some of you have worked with or talked about before. The question is, do we see any AR or VR or metaverse solutions being explored in energy and utility across the U.S. or Europe? And that could be in any area like training, diagnostics, problem resolution. Again, I throw that out for anybody who wants to hop in.
I would say yes, absolutely. The answer is, digital twins and metaverse types of solutions and programs I think play a really important role and have also really only scratched the surface, even though digital twins have been around for a while. So I think that it's incredibly important. It has been deployed in pockets. Things like I think Eric mentioned earlier about vegetation management or smart maintenance and using a picture worth 1,000 words and deploying some computer vision over those same pictures of the same asset over and over and over that a human being can't decipher differences, but certainly a computer can. Operating in that type of advanced way of improving operations and maintenance and safety, et cetera. So for sure, AR and VR is real. It's not broadly adopted, but I think there's a ton of opportunity. And that's an area where, one of my colleagues mentioned about test beds, great opportunity for doing some proof of value or multi-phase projects where you build one phase after another, and they stack up on top of each other. So for sure. Great question.
I'd like to add one more angle to this is, as customers install more rooftop or, so basically the AR, VR will have a big impact in the sense that when a developer comes knocking at my door and they can, just take a live photo of or not like video stream of my roof and say, this is exactly where your solar panel is going to be like, or this is how the transformer is going to look in your yard. So those are some augmented reality aspects that can be used to convince me or my family who is, like, I don't want an ugly transformer in our backyard, nothing. But at the same time, if they can show it visually, that can enable the grid to be a lot greener by, again, bringing in customers to the loop, showing them that, okay, if we paint your transformer green, it isn't going to look too bad, or something like that.
Anecdotally, funny you should say that. I have a generator, and I used to think those things were ugly, and now I think they're really cool.
Yeah, no, well said, and some really interesting use cases, and again, showing the opportunities that are out there. So I do want to move next to our next critical topic area, which is the market forces. Again, I'll note we keep getting some good questions here, and if we haven't answered yours yet, stay tuned because we will try to get to as many as we can, at least towards the end. And just to quickly reset the room for any of our attendees who may be joined late, if you missed the introduction, we have a panel of leading voices in the world of energy, data, and digitalization, and I've posed to them the claim that energy companies and by extension their technology partners might be missing the mark when it comes to opportunities for data and digitalization. And so now I'd love to ask some questions about what the market forces are doing to maybe correct this, or where we can look for market impact in the future. Once again, all listeners, please keep your questions coming and we'll pull them into the discussion as we go along. But to kick off the market section, for our panelists, are the market forces moving in a direction to properly incentivize energy companies to really tap into the opportunities from data and digital technologies? And maybe I'll pick on Jignesh first to see if he has any thoughts here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think competition is kind of driving a lot of digitalization in terms of staying ahead of the curve. There is a lot of incentives coming from government in tax credits, subsidies, especially on a cleaner energy side, which should drive some of this innovation, lower the cost. Obviously, the technological cost is lowering, and that should also incentivize organizations, especially in energy and utility side, to adopt some of these technologies, which can hugely benefit not just in a short term but long term. Just a couple of days back, I was reading something on some data points that overall, in short term, which is less than 6 to 8 months, organization has achieved or improved 6 to 8% on their bottom lines by adopting some of this data and digitalization processes. And over the period of long term, more than a couple of years to up to 4 years, 5 years, there has been 25% improvement in their revenue growths, as well as on operational cost as well. So there is a huge incentive coming from competition first, to staying ahead of the curve, coming from government, and obviously there is a social side as well, which kind of prompting this energy organization to have customer focused, personalized solutions, which kind of helps end user to get the information which they want at a real time, and then they can act on.
Absolutely. And any follow-up thoughts from the other panelists to add on to what Jignesh said there about the incentives and the market forces? Maybe I could add an additional prompt, which is from one thing I'm always curious about is what's coming from the customer side, because a lot of these technologies might be on the back end where the utility customer doesn't see or know them, and if it's working well, it's kind of you never know about it. But some of them are more present. The AR type opportunities that we were talking about earlier. So, is there any demand from the consumer, the utility customer side growing louder, and if so, in kind of what areas is that coming?
I can jump in, and I apologize. My computer just blue screened on me. But the big I think drivers that we're seeing, apart from people are working from home and they don't want their power to go out, they don't want interrupting their meetings and having to rejoin. Right? There's some significant, if it was high before, it's even higher for reliability. People want to know when their power is coming back on. There's a lot of technology and data and digital that gets them that information. It's not easy, and actually utilities haven't figured it out to a great point yet. I think what the consumers want, though, is everyone now wants an EV, right? Not everyone, but most people want to put an EV in their garage. That has completely changes the way that load is used, right? In terms of the load profiles of houses. There's a lot of back-end digital and data that's required to make sure that power stays on when you do that. I think the big, really interesting area is going to be around DERs, or distributed energy resources, and those prosumers, or the people. Not everyone's going to want to interact with the market. Personally, I want to pay my bill, right, and I want my power to stay on. However, there are people that are going to get excited by I bought my solar panels. I want to optimize how much money I can get back and sell back to the grid. I want my EV. I want to charge back and play that two-way interaction with the utility. I think that is going to be a really interesting place for growth and change. And it's driving utilities to have to completely rethink how they interact with the consumer, not just from a interaction side, but from like a technical back, right? We need to know what's happening, what they want to do. And we're going to have those two-way interactions that just weren't happening before.
Definitely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Great for you, Eric, to demonstrate, that need for reliability for us live in person. So it's a show and tell. And take it a step further, we actually had a couple of questions that kind of from the audience that went this way. So I'll pick on one, but from Dick Brooks again, but a couple of people kind of identified this, which is, we were talking about a massive expansion in the number of devices on the grid and exponential data growth. So how can the utility prepare to handle this data deluge and the rapid pace of change that's happening? And, the other way I've seen this, the question framed by some of the attendees is, are they ready to do so? So I'd love to hear, how as these electrification of vehicles, heat pumps and everything, we're adding the smart meters. There's so many more data points. So theoretically, so much more that could go wrong. So, are the utilities prepared to handle that? Are the market forces, or the technology, or the regulations, what's kind of driving, making sure that we're prepared for that? Or are we, present day, not prepared as we need to be?
I would say preparing for that. I wouldn't say it's a past tense for sure. And there's definitely different levels of maturity from a digital perspective, from a data perspective across various utilities. So it's a great question, and something that I talk about on a regular basis with the marketplace. One of the things that needs to happen is data interoperability and data contextualization. All of the different data that's coming in, utilities have a lot of data, and that's only going to continue to grow, as we all know. And so it's the ability to actually normalize that data and make it useful at a foundational level that utilities really need to work on. I guess, Carol, that goes back to what we said earlier in the conversation about AI and ML. It's great to deploy those things, but unless you have data normalization at the most foundational level, you can't do any of that upstream stuff, or you can't do the types of analysis that you want to do. So critical thing. And I think that is where we feel that we can serve an incredibly vital role working with utilities to support them on this data journey, because it is only exponentially growing. It's not necessarily interoperable. So there's a lot of things that we need to do to foster and create interoperability and integration from these different systems. So I'll pause and let my colleagues chime in too.
Yeah, I mean, it's an area of passion. So there's a couple layers to it, right? Utilities have more grid data than they ever did before, meaning just sensors that they're investing, putting on the system. They have control and visibility at more points than they ever have. They have meters generally at every house. So there's a really important data set called the network model that I think is critical to this, and I'll get to the rest of it. But the utilities need to build out their electrical connectivity model and understand where all these different assets are sitting and where that real-time data is feeding in. That allows them to really run the analytics to understand how does this solar panel impact my power flow? How can I restore power after an outage? How do I monitor power quality to make sure things are going, within the appropriate range for ANSI standard? And then in the future, how can I call upon my customers to reduce their load because we have, overloading situations? How do I dispatch, different DERs on the system? I think a really big gap and a really big challenge, though, is as we get to the behind the meter and everything at the home, are we going to have the utilities touching and interacting and sending controls to your solar inverter and battery, or are they going to, go through other means? Because there's a huge technology challenge to really enable that deep control within your house, and not everyone wants that. So I think that's a really interesting area to watch, and one that requires both OT and IT to work together to solve that.
Wonderful. Thank you all for that. This conversation's been great, and we're rapidly getting close to the top of the hour, which is not surprising because we could go on for hours and hours about this. So I do want to move on to the next area, which we've kind of woven through the conversation, but specifically talking about policy and regulation. And I know earlier in our conversation, we talked about how, again, the utilities are kind of uniquely positioned because of how they're regulated and how everything they do, from what they charge, what they choose to buy, how they build, is so controlled by the various jurisdictions that have control. So I'm curious if we can, again, I just kind of want to bring that to the forefront and talk specifically, how does that unique regulatory landscape impact what the utilities can or can't do when it comes to data investment and digitalization projects? And what have you seen as the result of that? Are there any projects that you thought a utility should or could have done, but the regulations got in the way? Or what's the general feeling there about the regulatory side?
I'm happy to dive in here and tell you that I think that to deploy some of the things that I was just talking about around data cleansing and building things from a foundational level to make sure that the utilities data house is in order to then be able to provide various different services to the consumer, to the prosumer, to employees, et cetera. A lot of that it does have is being developed and happening not on premise, but in cloud type environments. You see at times startups and utilities are like oil and water. And when regulators are also involved from a perspective of, operation, allowing for budgetary use around cloud, as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, I think regulators play a massive role in the utility being able to have sort of the shackles taken off them around using some of this cloud-based types of technology where much of the innovation is happening. So I think that's a critical element to that.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things that come to mind for me. If you look at CPUC in California and the EPIC programs, there's different ways that the regulators can help drive innovation at the utility, right? And having those programs and understanding that we're going to be asking our utilities to innovate, to share their learnings, and making those investments is a very good start. I think the challenge that I see a lot of times is, a lot of these things they're approaching it like a construction project. Hey, we're going to put in AMI. That's going to be a system and we're done. We're not going to invest anymore. It's just O&M from then on. I think they need to start looking at these technology platforms as a product that they're going to continue to invest in and grow and tailor to the utility. The challenge with that, though, is, right, they're going to say we want to do that, and they get challenged and they want to break down costs, and costs are replaced and everything's cut. So it's going to be that give and take of understanding that there's some investments that aren't traditional construction hard investments that are going to need to be made. And that's back to the people point as well. Because the problem with some of those pilot programs is it never gets to the crew, right? The crew's never like, I don't know what they're doing over there. How do we get to the crew? And that's going to require everyone working together and thinking through a way to fund typical O&M activities to get those folks engaged and going digital, right? So.
Definitely. And I think, we talk about moving beyond regulation more to policy. One thing I wanted to ask about that we've seen come up a lot in headlines recently is ESG and how many companies are diving into that and how the regulations may or may not be starting to push that. So I'd love to ask if any panelist wants to address how that comes into this conversation when we talk about utilities and their data. Is it a tool to push ESG in new and unique ways?
I'll let others jump in first, but
I was going to say yes, but I know you're not asking a yes or no question. Yes, I think for being able to leverage data and work on some real-time types of reporting around ESG is certainly a big opportunity for growth, both from the utility perspective and I'm sure from a policy point of view. I believe utilities like greater society is focused more on this type of critical important aspect of our society and how companies play a role in that. So I guess that's a little bit more than my yes, but probably not in the weeds.
Yeah, I'd like to add that this becomes more relevant only for the CNI customers and how they can establish different trade-offs, whether they're buying like a renewable energy certificate or things like that. I mean, there is room to, say, play around with how you pass on your demand charges. If you can cut down on your demand charges a little bit, if you have some ESG metrics set up with that same customer. So, but it's a very wide open area, and a digitalization can help answer these questions, I believe.
And there's specific cases around, right? A lot of this, ESG is broad, but when it comes to renewable credits and tracking of credits. Like they're, in terms of, who's generating it, who's distributing it, who's using it, there is a digital tools that you have to almost build to be able to manage that flow of information and credits. And that's one huge part of the use case. But on the other side of it, right, like utilities are very big on the environmental and sustainability side of this. They the generators obviously first off, but the distribution utilities has a big play in that as well. And everyone going to the, zero carbon and all this by 2050, like it's a huge trend and one that we probably will require digitization to be able to enable in a million ways. So
I'd say on top of that, actually, if you think of sustainability and environmental practices, it really does hit a lot of different departments. And think of supply chains and all of the downstream vendors that are supplying these products to utilities that are spending billions of dollars, on these is understanding, hey, what's the greening of my supply chain? What are the opportunities there? That requires data from the manufacturers to say, hey, this is how my product is manufactured. Here's how it degrades. Here's how it can be recycled. I mean, there's so much opportunity for utilities to significantly and very real green their business, not greenwashing, but actual steps of being able to demand from supply that they're putting in sustainable products as much as they possibly can, that type of thing. So huge, broad topic that really goes. You can go down a bunch of different silos to really determine. But I think supply chain's a really interesting one to think of. ESG, certainly something that I've been interested in recently.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for all that. And again, as we get close to the top of the hour, and I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for some last questions, because I had to skip over some, but to frame it in a tangible and a positive way as we kind of close out this conversation, I want to give you each an opportunity to speak towards some successful case studies that maybe you've had in these examples that we're talking about. So, I'll just kind of go down the line. And if you want to, highlight, are there any projects pet projects that you really want to, kind of brag about or speak to, or, share lessons learned from, then I'd love to kind of give you a platform to do so. So I don't know who to pick on first. Maybe I'll go to Jignesh.
Sure. I can definitely share one of our customer who has been pretty successful in achieving some of their business goals. And the problem statement, what they have been working with is to create a smart solution around a solution around smart meters, which can run on without power, on a battery life in remote areas, in deserts, mountains, and in remotest of places. And some of these smart meters can transmit the data back to via Verizon or mobile network to cloud, and then each individual customer gets their own usage patterns. In this particular case, it's a water utility where and nowadays we know how much water is important in terms of severe water crisis and scarcity across major states in US. So this particular smart watering system, how it helped is over the period it has reduced water loss in utilities and in cities from almost 22% to now down to 3%. That's a major benefit and revenue save for customers, but even for municipalities and corporations, government across the state. How did they do it? Interestingly, customer has a focus for next couple of years, right? What they want to do, how they want to achieve, and it has never been a big bang approach. It's a bite-sized approach, they frequent the releases or the solution updates every 1 month. They listen to the feedback from the end consumers. They come back, implement something which is a value for customers, rather than being technology driven and product driven. Rather than it focuses more on value delivery. And idea is to give what they want, what value customers can derive out of it. So I would say focusing on incremental approach rather than a big bang approach or technology driven. It's ironical, but yes, rather than having more technology focused approach, I think if the end consumer approach is taken, a lot of this energy and utilities organization will not miss the mark. Just to paraphrase that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. Shine, why don't you give a spotlight to use case, lessons learned, something that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of there's a ton of examples, in terms of, say, identifying where electric vehicles are being charged and trying to map that to where future transformer overloads are likely to happen. That's kind of a project that I'm fond of, and a utility has been leveraging it to, in making their rate case stronger in the future iterations. And I believe that has a lot of social impacts going forward as well.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds very, very necessary and interesting. So how about I go to Eric next?
Yeah, so it's always fun. There's a lot of amazing digital use cases. Everything from automating interconnection workflows, saving companies millions of dollars, to the network model things I was referring to earlier, where utilities are starting to build a digital twin of the grid. One more interesting one that I always like to bring up was back to the drones. So we had an innovation project with one of our clients where we had a theory that we could better inspect transmission towers by using drones. So we bought a nice drone, went out there, and we started, looking at cotter pins and points of the different transmission tower, brought in technology that allowed us to remotely perform or fly the drone. So we could have a maintenance inspector sitting at a desk, actually watching and pointing out the different issues that they see, automating the workflow, all to capture images of good and bad to be able to play into machine learning. That pilot was great. Couple things we learned. One was that it's not the drone's just one tool. Today they fly helicopters and they're just looking with a little thing writing down where they see problems. There's not a regulatory reason other than some of the more innovative utilities worry about fire risk, right? To capture as many defects as possible. So the image data, for other utilities that aren't quite as worried about kind of that failure risk, they were struggling to get over the hump to make the investment. The other thing that we found is the same concept applies with phones or any type of camera and image data. You can capture that, store it, and eventually train machine learning. The last thing we learned from that pilot was you need a lot of data and a ton of data. So it's probably an opportunity for the industry to work together to build out those image data sets to be able to use that kind of digital technology to identify when there are problems in the field. And the last lesson learned would be you got to do something with that data. So changing how utilities think about risk and using the inspections from the field to better inform their spend to fix things based on risk, probability, and impact of failure is a really important part of that journey. So I thought that was an interesting use case.
Great, thanks, Eric. And Andy, I saw your eyes kind of light up when Eric said that you have to use the data that you actually collect. So I'm willing to bet you have some use cases similar to that as well.
Yeah, I do, and I think that's where I spend a lot of my day is trying to support the usability of data that utilities have collected. But I was thinking about, from a case study perspective, there's two different case studies that come to mind that are, I think, interesting and emblematic about how we collectively, everybody on this call, people listening, anybody in the space, we collectively work towards solving this data problem and getting utilities to really leverage technology. So the one that I wanted to highlight is, and fortunately, I'm allowed to actually talk about this on a public level, which isn't always the case. So that shows some leadership by this utility, but is Consolidated Edison in New York. They're one of the largest investor-owned utilities, and they really have been working to digitalize the operating company, and using cloud and leveraging open source cloud technology. So we've been working with them to that end, from an IoT perspective, and really increase visibility into their data system across their ecosystem. So number of different, what does that mean? Well, what that really means is not only are we working with them on meter data management, so their smart grid data that's collected, for doing a number of different things beyond billing, but also integrations into things like their CIS system and transforming their legacy system into a modern system. But then going down the line of worker safety, thinking about leak detection for high pressure fluid filled pipes that, if they leak, cause significant environmental circumstance and disaster, and the ability to pinpoint that as soon as possible is a data problem that we work with them on. And then also the safety and security of their staff via connected worker safety projects. So all of these things are data-driven projects that we supply, but also work with the customer. And Con Ed is doing some great things. One of the things that I'm really excited about as somebody who lives in the area and is a customer of Con Ed is that overhead and underground surveillance, trying to promote safety. Thinking of manhole covers not blowing up into a crowded street in Manhattan. So doing things with manhole monitoring is an interesting project that we're currently engaged with. So lots of really interesting data activities with them. And the ability to be collaborative and work with them is certainly a model that I would love to bring to other utilities for sure. And I guess I would close with, in terms of, and there's a lot of detail I would love to go into, but won't now. I think another thing to really highlight is co-creation. And that also implies and entails leadership from Siemens, as well as from the co-creating utilities that we're working with. And we've had some significant success with engaging at the CEO level around that type of co-creation for business model, for new revenue streams, for how we can go about going to market, not like Siemens delivering something, but Siemens working in partnership with our customers and the whole utility ecosystem. So that's something we really value and look to be doing, is not just, hey, let us show up and fix everything for you, but it's, hey, let us show up and as a team, let's work together to solve these issues. And that's really how we go to market in many cases.
Absolutely, that's inspiring, and I think kind of a good note as we start to wrap up on. So I did promise I want to leave some time at the end in case our attendees have any final questions. So I'll pull one from earlier just for now, and if anyone has any final questions, get them in now, and I'll pull it in after. But I thought this was a good kind of overarching one from Bhushan, who said, with so many stakeholders and diversity, is it possible to build an off-the-shelf offering, or will it always be a customized system on top of a software platform? And I'm curious if that sparks anything from our panelists.
I chuckle a little bit because as we collectively, maybe it's the collective we, or maybe it's not, maybe I'll throw this out, but as utilities and the industry are wanting to adopt SaaS. SaaS by definition is probably less attuned to customization. And how do you deal with that when there's so much custom types of things, even down to what I said earlier about interoperability of data, where there isn't necessarily, there are standards, but many don't comply to those standards. And so how do you deal with that? it's such a great question, we could grab a few more beverages and probably stay on the line a lot longer and work through discussing it. But I do think that's where partnership is incredibly important, to think about how can we do these things. Can one off-the-shelf type of product, I would say in niche areas for sure. Overarching, it's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem of partners. It's an ecosystem of providers. It's an ecosystem of technologies coming together. That's a great question. I love that, and could spend a whole nother session on that. So Matt, maybe that's something that we take away as an opportunity for another a whole nother dialogue.
Absolutely, I'll write that down. But curious, does anyone else have any thoughts that don't need to take up a whole session, and maybe save it and tease it for next time?
Yeah, Jignesh, were you going to say something? Or was I gonna...
Just one point. I think what we've been seeing in some of these solutions and some of these SaaS providers, what they are concentrating more and more is vertical parts, not the entire horizontal end-to-end pieces, but focus on something, be expert about it. For example, data integrations. There are a lot of organizations which is providing data integration from 50, 100 data sources and kind of creating maybe single source of truth, which can be kind of graded and massaged and kind of put it into platinum grade data, which other applications can reuse it. So there is a huge case where some of the slices can become off the shelf. But as absolutely Andy mentioned, there are so many diverse complex nature of the data across energy and utilities sector, which kind of at this point of time makes me think that there will always be you can have some platform and then you may end up building some custom solution for the customer need.
Absolutely, I agree with both Andy and Jignesh. I think there are some spot situations where a product and out of the box may work to deliver on one specific issue. However, utilities are very complex, right? They're different regulatory environments, different actual physical grid makeup, different people, different tech maturity and what they've allowed to been put in. So at the end of the day, no one's going to come up with that. Even if someone had the perfect solution that did everything out of the box, no one's going to be able to implement that. So I think utilities, this is where enterprise architecture and thinking at an enterprise level about where are we buying applications out of the box, where are we going to build our own custom experiences, and having the skill sets to be able to manage a complex organization like that is incredibly important. You also don't want everyone else buying their own out of the box solutions and not talking to each other. I think DERMS, and we haven't brought up DERMS yet, but it's the classic example, right? Everyone wants a DERMS, but you got to know what your business needs, what your constraints are, and how everyone's going to work around this type of technology. You can't just buy a solution to your problems without knowing what your problems are.
Amen to that. De-siloing at not just the utility level, but across our ecosystem. Boy, that's massive, and something that I hope we get to a nirvana state of being de-siloed. That's totally a great point.
Agreed, and I think that might be a perfect note to end the panel on today, and like I said, maybe tease out a future one. So I do want to take the moment to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and for sharing your insights and your time. It's very appreciated. It was a lively conversation, and I hope our listeners took some valuable insights away, because I sure know that I did. So with that, I'd like to, again, thank you all for listening in today. Thank you for joining. We do hope to be holding these joint sessions between Saviant Consulting and Schechter Energy and Policy more in the future. So keep an eye out for more. And I'd say with that concludes our session. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. It was fun.
Thank you very much.